Hey, Tactical Painter, out in the Suits Crafting wood shop. We are back out here in the shop. I want to do a quick video for One Iron Bell, one of my YouTube followers that asked about how to work with ash. So we're going to talk about how to work with remains, whether that be, and it's cremated remains, whether that be human, dog, cat, whatever it is that you have some leftover ash from, and how to work with it. So without further ado, let's get started. Just kidding, that was turning from my floor. First thing I want to note, when you're working with ash, do be respectful. Whether that be ashes from the remains of your own loved ones, of course you're going to be respectful, but especially when you're working with ashes, cremated remains from customers that either whether you know them or you don't know them, do let them know the levels of respect that you're going to give for their loved one. Try to make it a fast turnaround because they are parting with something that's very meaningful to them for a period of time, and that can be a very difficult thing for some people. So do be respectful. Try to get your order done for that as quickly as you possibly can. Sometimes things just don't work out as quickly as you hope, and there are some contributing factors that they need to be aware of when they are going to be handing over those ashes to you, which we'll talk about now. First thing that you need to decide when you're going to work with ash and resin is what type of resin are you going to use. Are you going to use an epoxy, or are you going to use a urethane type resin like Alumilite? One thing to note is that the ash, though it is ash, and you would think that that would be a dry substance, it actually comes out extremely porous. And so because of that, it absorbs moisture out of the air just real easily. First time I tried to work with the ash, it was in really dry months here in August, actually. And I thought that ash would be plenty dry, and there was a lot of moisture that interacted with the Alumilite, caused a lot of bubbles and ripples and really awful things in the resin. And luckily, I was smart, knowing that it was a brand new substance for me, and so I just did like a necklace charm out of it to start. The customer thought that the necklace charm was great, even with the bubbles and stuff, so I actually made that into a necklace for them while I was testing to figure out how to make the pen. So all of the ash that I used, I made sure to get back to the person, even off of, they even wanted the shavings, and I even took the shavings and made like a little sphere out of it with some rose petals and things in it, and made a nice little art piece that they could put in their curio cabinet. So those are things to be cognizant of. How closely is the person tied to the shavings? Do they want all of it back, or do they just want the end product, just the pen? So you do need to know that for your customer. Some customers, they don't care about the shavings, others do. So do be aware of that. But be aware of the water content, because the ash is very porous. It will absorb water right out of the air. So if you're going to use an epoxy, you don't have to worry about it as much. If you're going to use a urethane resin, it reacts violently with any sort of moisture, and so you need to stabilize it. It's an absolute must. I've tried using the ash, just drying it out of the oven. It does not work. You do need to stabilize it. So speaking of stabilizing, if you're going to be using a urethane resin, you're going to stabilize it. Cactus juice works really well to stabilize it. What I do is first I dry it out. I put it in the oven. I just put it in on a flat tray, and I just flatten it out as much as I can. Put it in the oven for about an hour at like 150, 200 degrees. Get it as dry as you possibly can. If you choose to, you can siphon, put the ash through a sieve, get as much of the just small particles as you can, get out some of the bigger chunks. Sometimes you're going to be left with pieces of bone, teeth, small bits of things that don't always break down in the flames from the cremation process. And so you want to get as much of the small pieces as you can, because those are going to work better in your resin casting. If you're going to be turning it. If you're not going to be turning it, the big pieces don't matter, as long as they're not too big for the thickness you're going to be pouring. But if you're going to be turning it, you want to get as much of the bone particles and the teeth particles out as you can, because those are going to wreck your tools. Because calcium is denser and harder of a material than steel is, and so it's going to wreck your tools. So you want to get rid of as much bone as you possibly can. A little bit in there is not going to be a huge deal, but if you have a lot of really big chunks, it's going to take you longer to turn it. It's going to be harder on your tools. You're going to create a lot of heat, and you might ruin your casts. So you want to get as much of those out as you can. Personally, I don't sift it. I just go through and pick out small pieces with tweezers that I see when I flatten them all out on that tray before that drying process, and I put those back into the baggie that they provided me the ash into. And I just use everything that's there minus those big pieces that you can see with your eye. Just get rid of all the big pieces and then flatten it all out onto that tray and then put it in the oven. After it comes out of the oven, you immediately stabilize it. Don't let it cool down at all. Immediately get it into your stabilizing container. For me, I use this little honey jar I actually got at a cousin's wedding. They had little jars of honey on the tables, and this was perfect. It's a very small jar, so it's not a whole lot of extra room of wasted space. And then what I did was I poked a bunch of holes into the lid. And when you poke holes into your lid for stabilizing, this is the thing of note, do it from the inside going out, because when you puncture a hole with a nail or a pin or whatever you're going to use, it takes that metal and it dents it outward. If you punch them in the top like you would when we collected bugs when we were kids, that's fine and dandy having those holes go down. But when you're doing this for stabilizing, you need to puncture those holes so that the metal goes up out the top of your lid. That way air, as it collects in the lid, will escape out those holes. And if you have them punctured down so that the peaks are going to the inside, then you're going to end up with a big air bubble at the top of your can, in the top of your lid, that the air will not escape out through. And you do not want any air in contact with that, because that's not going to allow it to depressurize fully. It's not going to allow it to do a lot of things. So you need to get all the air out of here as possible. So puncture your lids from the inside out. Then I put my ash in here, and then I take a coffee filter and I put it over the top of the whole thing, and then I put the lid over the top of that, so that way it's jar, coffee filter, then the lid, and the lid holds the coffee filter down, so you don't have to try to rubber band it, do anything weird. I've tried rubber bands. Rubber bands will actually break down in the cactus juice a little bit, so I don't recommend doing it that way, and the rubber bands get weird. Try to take them off and they shoot, and now you've got cactus juice on the wall. Ask me how that happened. But I like this lid method. Holds the coffee filter down. The coffee filter is just there to keep any fine particulate from escaping out of your holes. So the coffee filter is a must. I highly recommend the coffee filter, just because it helps to aid from losing any of your ash. So you can tell your customer that you did not lose any ash during the process. As you stabilize, the air cannot get through that coffee filter easily. Those holes that I use, I puncture are very small intentionally, so that way I don't have any loss of the ash. But the air doesn't get out of it very well. So as you're stabilizing, you get your negative air pressure going. About halfway through, I will release air back into it. And so now I've got a negative pressure in here, and that like sucks the juice right through those holes. And it doesn't suck the juice. What it actually does is the air pressure forces it into the holes, fills up the jar, and as soon as I stop seeing air coming out of the jar, then I'll start sealing it, start the vacuum again, and then it will start to draw the leftover air out of the ash. So that's a real simple process, but something you need to watch for is that you need to release the vacuum in the middle of it filling in order to get this jar to fill up with the cactus juice and get all the air out, and then reapply your vacuum and get that to start to depressurize and get all the air out of your ash. So once you stop seeing air bubbles coming up out of your ash, I kind of wrap it on the table real lightly, in order to kind of make sure that there's no bubbles stuck in between the sediment, in between the small bits and pieces. Get that all to release. Once that's all done, release the air back into your containers, and then let that set for double the amount of time that you drew vacuum on it, just to make sure that it absorbs as much of that stabilizing resin as possible. Once that happens, then you can take your jar out of your juice, take the lid off, take your coffee filter off, and then pour all your ash out. Scoop all of it out of there that you can onto a blue shop towel. I lay it all out on a blue shop towel. I take a tongue depressor and spread it all out as thin as I possibly can onto that blue shop towel, and get as much of liquid as you can off of the ash. And then transfer your blue shop towel onto a piece of aluminum foil on a cookie sheet. I have a toaster oven, just like a little cheapo foodie toaster oven that I got from somebody on OfferUp. And I picked that up just for curing my resins. So I don't use it for anything else. Now, don't use your food oven because your wife will kill you. But I use just this little foodie toaster oven that's only for curing resins and heating up molds. And then I lay out on a cookie sheet that slides into that thing, a piece of aluminum foil, and then I lay out the ashes on top of that aluminum foil as thin as you can get it. So don't have any pieces on top of other pieces. Tamp it all down, get it all flat, and then put that in your oven and fully cure your resin according to the specifications from Cactus Juice. Which for me, I think is like 200 degrees for like 90 minutes, I think is what I do most of mine for, and they turn out really well. So after that, you take your tongue depressor or whatever, you scrape it all into a pile off your aluminum foil, and then pour it into a container where you can seal it and keep it away from moisture until you're ready to do your casting. If you do your casting right away, that'd be ideal. But if you're not going to, put it in an airtight container, and then before you do your casting, put it with your mold, and if you're going to do a hybrid, with your wood, and heat them up together. So you heat up your mold before you're casting, heat up your wood before you're casting, and heat up your ash before you're casting, just to make sure any surface moisture gets baked off of that before you go and do your casting. Now, speaking of casting, I have found 4 types of castings that I find that work really well, that complement and show off that you have ash in your blanks. One thing to note when working with the ash is that a lot of the particulate that you're going to be working with that's in the ash is denser than the resins you're going to be using. Because of that, your ash is going to sink. It's not going to float like you do with our glitters and stuff. It is going to sink, and it's going to go down to the bottom of whatever you're working on, and it's not going to stay floating and suspended. Some of the really fine stuff will stay floating and suspended, but most of that is going to go straight to the bottom. Even working with a fast set Alumilite, all that heavy stuff sinks so quick. So do be aware of that, and that's why I've come up with these 4 methods for casting your blanks in resin. The first type is to do a thin sheet and then bend that and mold it and make a flexible sheet of resin with the ash in it. So what you do is you mix up your resin, whether that be Alumilite or an epoxy, and then pour that out onto a nonstick surface and let that set on the nonstick surface, going back and forth with a heat gun or a blowtorch, getting rid of all the bubbles. And so you have a colored sheet of resin with your ash in it. And then once that starts to get to the stage where it's thicker than Laffy Taffy, but still moldable, you're going to go through and cut strips, whether that be with a razor knife or a pair of scissors if it's still pliable enough to cut with scissors. You're going to go through, cut strips, and just mold them and bend them into crazy weird shapes, and then let those set up. So, bend them around a screwdriver shaft, just kind of bend them into all sorts of crazy weird shapes. Make sure that's super thin, and then use gloves because they can get really hot, especially once you bend it. Like any place that you bend that action will actually cause it to heat up more. So do be aware of that. They are going to be hot at that stage. Use gloves and touch them quickly and sparingly. Then you're going to take those ribbons and just shove them all over inside of your mold. And then using another color, and with ash or without ash, you just pour around all those ribbons and fill up your mold, put that in your pressure pot, and then that's your blank. Real easy and simple. I did one for a family that lost their dog named Tinkerbell, and we did one with Tinkerbell's ashes that was a gold ribbon. Because Tinkerbell leaves this gold trail wherever she flies, we thought it'd be really cool to have this gold ribbon with her ash mixed into the gold, all fluttering and flickering through the blank, and then poured in like an off forest green, kind of like a moss green, around that. And then so you had a green blank with the gold and the ash fluttering and flickering through that, and that turned out really neat. That was the first one I ever did, and it turned out really well. So that's one method. The second method is a hybrid, so you're using wood. With the hybrid method, I recommend using blanks of wood that look like this. So you've got your mountain peaks and stuff like this, and then the wood itself only goes up about halfway up your mold. One like this would work as well, where you've got half of the blank is going to be all wood, but it's got this steep angle that really draws out here, because when you pour your ash, it's going to fall into all those valleys between the mountains, and that's what's going to show up. Same with this one. When you pour your resin, all of the ash is going to sink, and it's going to all collect in the valleys of all those mountain peaks, and so you're going to have all of this wood in the mountains, then your layer of ash, and then whatever color you pour above that. My favorite one that I did for a customer was using the same method, and I don't remember if it was green or blue. I want to say it was green. We did a green one like this, and then we poured the ash down, and it sank in all those valleys, and then above that we did a galaxy or cosmos, I think it was cosmos pour, where I did my cosmic cloud colors, and so it looked like a nebula in the sky above the ash of her dog. And so that one was really cool. I really liked how that one turned out, especially like got, like the earth in green on the bottom, and then you have the ash of her dog, and then going up into the cosmos. Like that was a neat little transition going in between the three. So you can have fun with it. Because it's a hard time, but you can have some fun with it. And the customer really liked the idea too, and so that's what we did for her. Again, stabilized wood, and then stabilized the ash, and then I put this into, I'll grab my mold here, show you how this works. These pieces go halfway down into the mold. So once that's down there like that, that ash is going to sink into the mold, and it's going to fill in all those little cavities and crevices. Same with this one. So you put this one in there, and now you can see that one goes halfway down into the mold, and that bottom section is where all of your ash is going to fill in. Same on this side. So you want to use one that's about halfway down. So when you're cutting, if you're going to cut your own burls like I do, you want to cut very intentionally some of these thin ones when you plan on working with ash. So this is a 3/4 inch mold, so cut these about 3/8 of an inch thick in order to guarantee that you're going to be at your middle line. So you can use any type of pen that you want, whether that be a cigar, which cigars look really good. If you want that to be like a Devlin, works really well. I really like the ones that have a long blank to them. I don't really like segmenting them off, but if you use the ones that have like a single tube long blank, work really well. The bolt action works good, a single tube again. Slim lines would work, but you're getting really thin because your ash layer is going to end up being a few millimeters thick, and then you're only going to end up with a few millimeters of wood, a few millimeters of resin, and it's not going to work out as well. So I like using a thicker pen. Something above 8 millimeters would work fine for your tube size. 7 millimeters, a little thin for tube size, so I don't recommend 7 millimeter. And Sierra, while it would work, you're getting awfully thin on the walls of the pen to do it with like a Sierra kit. So I wouldn't recommend doing it with a Sierra, just because like the bone and pieces are so hard that resin's getting very thin, holding something that's, you know, twice as dense that it is. So I wouldn't recommend that as well. You want to be very intentional in your pen selection when doing your pen. Now, if you're going to be cutting your burls and you can't be as selective with how you're going to cut them, you can't get that 3/8 inch thick, 3/4 inch wide piece like those are, and all you can get are just live edges like this one. What you can do with this is find a way to chuck it up and turn it round, or even just cut the corners off and then throw that into a 3/4 inch PVC pipe and try to fill in, if you can, with like hot glue. So fill in with hot glue on all of the sides as much as you can, in order to not have the ash sink down into your sides in between your PVC. It's best to round it out, but if you can't, all you can do is knock the corners off and then fit it into your PVC. That will work, but you need to do something to fill in the gaps here. And then you want to keep as much of the ash to this end as you can. And then fill your PVC tube from the top down, so that way you've got a empty cavity like that with your wood down inside, and you pour into your PVC tube like that. So that's another way to do it. One of my other favorite ways to do this was using liquid clear. I liked using the liquid clear with it because with the liquid clear epoxy resin, I did not have to stabilize the ash beforehand. All that I had to do was dry it out in the oven, and I could immediately go into the epoxy resin. So the epoxy resin works really well with the ash, so long as you still dry it out. I have not tried epoxy resin without drying it out, because I know there's water in there and I don't want it to heat up and create steam bubbles. So using an epoxy resin that I degassed in my vacuum chamber worked really well. So the layer and angle method is what I'm going to talk about next, and that's where I took a piece of wood and I set it down on the bottom of my tray that I was going to put this mold on. And then what I did was I angled my mold like so, and then I filled with my resin and ash mixture, whatever color. I did like I think it was red and black. Filled first with red, and then put the angle on the other side, and then did black. And I went back and forth like that a few times. You want to get as shallow an angle as you can. You don't want to go too steep. That way you can get multiple layers crisscrossing over top of each other somewhere in the middle point. And then you're going to use that middle for your pen blank. That way you can get multiple layer lines of the color through there. And it looks really cool. I really liked how that one turned out. That was a really simple method, but it was time consuming because of power open time, and it has a longer curing time than Alumilite does. So you do want to be aware of that when working with an epoxy that has a longer open time. You got to let it cure, you got to roughen up the top, and then you can pour your next layer at your other angle and just keep going back and forth until you get to that top on both of the corners, and then lay it flat, fill it in to flatten it out, and then you're ready to go and do your drilling of your tube and cutting it to size and all that stuff. Now the easiest way to do it would be honestly just to do an inlay, doing the same method that you would do with like a ring, or doing an inlay of opals, which you guys have seen me do a ton of times. So you just take your parting tool and part a couple of notches in, or a couple of grooves, or however you want to do it, and then you just put some glue into your crevice, and then have something underneath to catch. But then you just sprinkle the ash directly onto the glue, put some more CA glue on the top, and let it cure, and just do that through the whole groove like you guys see me do with the opals. That's probably the easiest and quickest method, and then you don't have to do any of the epoxy pouring. You don't lose as much, especially with that method, because everything that you pour into that groove stays in the groove, and then afterward all you have to do is sand it flush and and make it give it a nice polish. And that's the easiest method, really, is to just use your parting tool, put in some nice wide grooves, put a dot of CA inside the groove, pour the ash onto the dot, rotate it, put another dot in, pour a little more ash, and just do that all the way around, and then cure it, let it sit overnight, come back and turn it, and that's the easiest method. Now, as far as the turning process goes, you must, and this is not even a question, this is not a discussion, you must wear a mask. In order to work with this stuff, you have to have a mask on. The calcium dust that you're going to get off of this stuff is extremely abrasive to the inside of your lungs and will ruin your lungs. You do not, under any circumstances, want to be breathing in this stuff. When I do it, I have my overhead filter going, I have my door open, and I have an RZ mask on with a new filter in it. And that's the only way that I will work with this stuff, because you do not want to be breathing in that calcium dust. And then even in between processes, don't even take your mask off. Don't take it off to blow off dust. Don't take it off, period, until you are completely done and exited your shop. And then, the next day when the air is settled, only then would I come back out and work in my shop without my mask on. And then even then, I'll still go through and vacuum up. After I'm done for the day, vacuum up and leave my shop, take my mask off out of my shop. It is absolutely imperative not to breathe any of that stuff, and it is not good for you. As far as turning tools go, you can try to use high-speed steel or carbon steel tools, your normal skews and chisels and stuff. You can absolutely try that. I would not recommend it. What I use is a carbide Easy Wood Tools roughing gouge, or not a roughing gouge, just the rougher. This is the only thing that I've found that will cut the pieces of bone and fragment and stuff that you get in there. And even then, it's very rough on that edge. You can pretty much guarantee when you are done, you are going to be marking that edge black, rotating it to a new spot, and then you're never going to be able to use that again until you resharpen that edge. So, and you can resharpen these actually using diamond stones, which I do occasionally whenever they wear out. You can see here that edge is dark because I turned it after I did my last ash blank a few months back. And then I won't use that edge again. And when that black spot reaches around to this side and this spot goes dull, I'll take that off and sharpen it. Maybe I'll do that in another video later. But yeah, using the roughing gouge, not the roughing gouge, darn it, I said it again. Using the roughing carbide tool, you can absolutely shave very thin layers of bone and the ash at a time. But you do need to be careful when you're going back and forth, because as you come into the ash is going to push your tool out, and then you're going to go past the ash, and then it's going to drop back into your resin, and then you're going to end up with this hump spot. So do be deliberate when you're cutting, and knowing that that ash is going to push your tool away, and then you're going to fall back into the resin. So be very deliberate in your passes. And I even will go into the ash directly first, and then level my resin to that spot, and then go into the ash again. And then once I get down close to my bushings, I'll actually finish it off with sandpaper. Using a coarse abrasive, and then work your way up from there in order to help guarantee that I don't overheat anything. Wet sanding is a must as well. And you can get a really fine polish off of the bone using the wet sanding method. If you dry sand, your bone is going to burn. You're going to end up with black bones, and you don't want that. But using a wet sanding method, keeping it very wet, you can get a really high polish off of the bone. It looks really good. So I highly recommend wet sanding. Get yourself a nice wet sanding pad set or wet sanding papers and use those. I use 3M professional sheets, which are the purple. These have a really, really good texturing to them. The abrasive that they use to stick the paper to the abrasive is really good. It doesn't come off. I I really like these pads. They stay clean, they stay abrasive for a long time. And then I get them in like a 5-pack sheet, and then I cut them into these smaller pieces, and then those work really, really well. This one here is a 220. I would start usually with like a 100 or a 120, even a 150 when doing the bone. Just depends on how much I have to take off, how close I am to the bushing. You want to get really aggressive with it, but it's not like pressing into it harshly. You just want to get an aggressive abrasive in order to get a lot off at once, but take it slow. This is not something that you can rush. It's going to either work for you or it's going to blow apart. And so you need to let it dictate the speed. You cannot force the speed upon your workpiece. That is one area where this stuff is very finicky, is you can't go too fast or it will shred up on you. I think I covered everything that I had on my note board here. It's a really simple, easy process. You just kind of need to know a little bit about what you're doing with it and be very intentional about your processes with it. Know your epoxies, know your resin that you're going to be working with, know your tools, and know your material. Those are like 4 of the main things, is just to know what you're doing, be very intentional, know your materials, know your process, and know your resins. And you can get really good results working with the ash. And then at the end of the day, just make sure, always be respectful and give your customers ideas about lead times. If you're going to be stabilizing it, let them know that you have to stabilize it first, and that's going to be a few day process a lot of times with stabilizing. And so it's going to be a few day process for that, and then you've got to cast it and then let that cure for a few days before you can drill it. And then you have to glue the tube in, which then takes another day to set up. So be aware that you may have their ash for a few weeks before they get the ash back of their loved one. And if they're uncomfortable with that, and they ask you to speed it up, tell them you can't speed it up. This is the process. I'm sorry. Might not be the right thing for you if that's going to be an issue. Using an epoxy, you can speed that up because you're not having to do the stabilization process, but it does limit your options when it comes to working with, like if you want to do a hybrid, because the epoxy, at least the epoxy that I use, I don't get great color results with some of my like color mixing choices or glitters and things, using an epoxy versus using a Lumelite. So that's an option that I go with, especially if I'm doing like a Cosmos blank, because the colors that I get work better with the Lumelite than I do with the epoxy, because the epoxy, I can't get it to do the effects that I want. So I know this video has been a little long-winded. I had a lot of notes that I've been compiling over the last few weeks. So I hope this answers all your questions. If you have any other questions or anything that you wanted covered specifically that I didn't touch on, just go ahead and leave me comments in the section down below. Be sure to leave a thumbs up if you liked the video. And then I hope that this was everything for you. And let me know if you have anything else that you want me to touch on in the future. So thanks for joining me out in the Suits Crafting Wood Shop. Have a great one. Happy turning. God bless.